Settle in, everyone, grab a drink, grab a snack, because today we are talking about celebrity culture current affairs. The topic of surrogacy, specifically in the celebrity space, is one that we have seen cycle in and out of public interest over recent years, specifically surrounding the ethics of surrogacy, spotlighted usually in the US, and the implications of what seems to be a rise in celebrities opting to use surrogates, or alternatively, at least a rise in conversation around celebrities choosing to opt the surrogacy route. In the past couple of weeks, the past month, we've seen this conversation hit headlines and social media all over again when Lily Collins and Charlie McDowell posted that they have welcomed their first child via surrogate. Now, I want to be clear about something. I am going to use a few celebrity examples in this video, just like articles and headlines love to. But in my research for this video, I've realized that those headlines and those articles tend to lack a little bit of nuance surrounding the wider conversation of surrogacy. And they also seem to forget that these are real people that we are talking about. So I want to be clear that anybody I mention in this video, I'm not passing judgment on them, nor am I passing judgment on anyone who has pursued surrogacy or who has been involved in surrogacy. Because I think the reasoning and intentions behind pursuing surrogacy is going to be different in each case or example you encounter. But what I would like to discuss is this celebrity culture we're seeing emerge surrounding surrogacy, the public opinion that is evolving as a result, and also how this mainly American focus is affecting how we're discussing the legalities of surrogacy. And also, if my voice starts going like that or I sound a little bit congested, I am recovering from the flu, so please bear with me. So essentially what I'm trying to say in this introduction is that the purpose of this video is social commentary, and all of my references will be linked in the description down below if you would like to look, if you would like to have a read. I'm really hoping this, like all of my videos, can be a place where we can have an open conversation where we are willing to consider the shades of grey that quite frankly surround most topics and issues in public discourse. But with that being said, let's dive a little bit first into what surrogacy actually is, the legalities surrounding it, and then we'll dive even further into celebrity culture, examples of celebrities who have pursued surrogacy, and the public opinion and reaction to those. So what is surrogacy? In one form or another, we can trace surrogacy back as far as humans have existed, or as far back as religious and biblical texts go, depending where you believe the origins of humanity is. When you have a polyamorous understanding to the origins of society, you see the concept of a concubine, which is a woman who engages in a sexual relationship with a man she is not married to and holds a lower status than the wife. As a result, you would often see that any child produced from that relationship as the man's child would either be raised as the wife's child as well, therefore the concubine has carried a child for another woman, or you would see that these women in these relationships, whether they were the wife or the concubines, would all raise children together as a community. So, although not necessarily exactly how we understand surrogacy today, these are examples of one woman carrying a child and another woman either completely raising or helping to raise that child. And I think perhaps this origin to the idea of surrogacy, with the concubine having a lower status than the wife, is what sometimes have people fearing surrogacy as a Handmaid's Tale-esque exchange, where eventually women of childbearing age are going to be rounded up and put into houses to bear children for couples. Especially when Margaret Atwood did borrow the idea of the concubine from biblical stories to inspire the role of the handmaid. But I argue perhaps we are simplifying far too much the link to these inspirations of these stories to what surrogacy currently is, in part due to the legal protections that are now in place for surrogates and intended parents. Now, obviously, those legal protections differ greatly globally, but in this video, we are going to have a US focus and in part also a UK focus as a comparison. And in those examples, laws do exist in an attempt to safeguard both surrogates and intended parents. In fact, some, such as Natalie Gable in the 2017 article, What the Handmaid's Tale Has Taught Me About Surrogacy, suggests that The Handmaid's Tale is not a warning against surrogacy in general, but the intention behind it is what we should focus on. The real message is not that surrogacy exploits women, it is that women should always have the right to choose the circumstances in which they conceive and carry children. So, with all this being said, how do we actually understand surrogacy in the 21st century Western world? Well, let's start with a definition given by Yale Medicine. Yale Medicine suggests that surrogacy is a process in which a woman carries and delivers a child for a couple or individual. In this process, surrogate mothers are impregnated through the use of in vitro fertilization or IVF. For this process, a legal contract is required for intended parents and their carrier before medical treatment begins. And this process should involve a fertility center or clinic. And this highlights a very important part of what modern surrogacy is, and that is the fact that it involves informed consent. Surrogates and intended parents come to an agreement prior to any transfers or procedures taking place. So, unlike perhaps someone who becomes pregnant and then decides to give their child up for adoption, going out and searching for adoptive parents for that child, the surrogate becomes pregnant with the knowledge that that child will be for another couple or individual. After all, surrogacy is a very involved process that should not be taken on lightly, both mentally and physically. And then, obviously, different to this example once again is the fact that nowadays, often, a surrogate does not have a genetic connection to the child they are carrying. On this topic, according to the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, there are two types of pregnancy. The most popular these days is full surrogacy, also known as host or gestational surrogacy. This means that the eggs of the intended mother or a donor are used, meaning there is no genetic connection between the baby and the surrogate. The other type of surrogacy is partial surrogacy, also known as straight or traditional surrogacy. And what this involves is the surrogate's own eggs being fertilized by either the intended father's sperm or a sperm donor's sperm. Now, as I mentioned, full or gestational surrogacy is far more popular nowadays. And as we will see when we get into the legal side of surrogacy, at least in the US, there are some states that actually have outlawed traditional surrogacy altogether. And before, when we talked about how Yale Medicine defines surrogacy, they were talking about gestational surrogacy. I believe gestational surrogacy has gained popularity as a result of the medical advances that allow intended parents to still be biologically tied to surrogate pregnancy. So now we know what surrogacy is, we have to ask why someone may pursue the surrogacy route. So there are so many reasons why individuals and couples may pursue surrogacy. For example, the page Why Surrogacy is So Popular with Celebrities on the Family Creations website notes many reasons why, yes, celebrities, but anyone may pursue surrogacy. And these include health risks such as polycystic ovarian syndrome, autoimmune diseases, heart disease, thyroid disease, high blood pressure, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, and placenta accreta. And then on top of this, you have fertility issues such as being unable to conceive or sustain a pregnancy. You have the cases of same sex couples where they physically, biologically are unable to conceive a child together. And surrogacy may also be an option for those concerned about their age when it comes to risks of conceiving. Kim Cotton wrote an opinion piece in iPapers surrounding her own experience of being a surrogate in the UK in the 80s, when surrogacy looked very, very different, including insemination of a surrogate's own eggs with the intended father's sperm and a lack of legal precedent surrounding surrogacy. Her experience led her to set up COTS, Children Overcome Through Surrogacy, in 1988 to improve the experience of surrogacy in the UK, which, as of January 2023, has helped to birth 1,112 children. Here's a quote from her article: "Celebs are making surrogacy look like the latest trend, but the reality can be heartbreaking," which shines a light perhaps on the place of surrogacy and the differences between surrogacy in the UK and the US. Surrogacy is commonplace now, in my view. Infertility can affect people from all walks of life. All the soaps have had surrogacy storylines, and it is becoming more popular among celebrities. In the USA, money talks and you can buy anything, but we would never allow that to happen in the UK. At the moment, surrogates can only be paid for expenses, but cannot be paid to carry a child. All the couples I have dealt with are genuinely incapable of having children naturally. No one here would help someone who just could not be bothered with pregnancy. And here, Kim Cotton touches on a critique that many have surrounding the rise in celebrities pursuing surrogacy, that they simply cannot be bothered to carry a pregnancy. Similarly, we also see this idea of surrogacy being a financial transaction in the US mentioned, which I'm sure we can already start to see the critiques of. That rich celebrities can potentially take advantage of or manipulate those in financial strain in order to have children. Or in any case, those from more vulnerable or less privileged backgrounds may be forced to consider surrogacy as a result of financial strain they are experiencing. So let's think about what the US law says about surrogacy, and more specifically, how this may safeguard or not safeguard people against the manipulative transactional potential of surrogacy. But first, we need to think about how the law actually works in America. Especially for people like me who have not grown up with the American legal system, I'm going to give a little short, quite simplified version of how American law works and is constructed. I am splitting this video up into chapters, so if you don't need this recap, feel free to skip ahead to actually what the law says, which will be the next section. But let's do a little breakdown. Essentially, in the US, there are 3 levels at which the law can exist, and all of those laws have to exist within the confines of the rights enshrined in the US Constitution. But those 3 levels are federal law, state law, and local law. So federal law are the laws that are uniform across the US as created by US Congress and is aligned with the US Constitution. So examples of federal laws could be immigration laws, and they could also be any federal criminal laws, such as relating to tax fraud or counterfeiting money. Now, in theory, anyone can petition for a bill to be written into federal law, but a bill must be sponsored by a representative of either the House or the Senate, which are the 2 bodies of US Congress. That representative will introduce the bill to either the House or Senate, depending when they are a representative, and then that bill will be assigned a committee. That committee will research, discuss, and make any amendments to that bill before it is introduced to the chamber to be voted on. If it passes in the body of Congress where it was introduced, it will then move on to the other body of Congress. So if it was introduced in the House, it will move to the Senate or vice versa, to then go through a very similar process. It will be introduced, a committee will be assigned, they will discuss, research, make any amendments, it will be voted on once again, and if it passes, the 2 versions that have been voted on have to be considered together, any amendments agreed to and voted on once more by all of the representatives before, if it finally passes, it makes it to the president. Now, the president is the one that signs things into federal law, although he can refuse to sign something into law. If that happens and Congress is in session, they can then veto his veto, essentially, and still push through a bill into law. I hope you're still with me after that. Just to even complicate things a little bit further, the Supreme Court can overrule federal laws because it acts as a judiciary review. What that means is the US Supreme Court is the highest form of court in the US, and it is tasked with ensuring that laws adhere to the constitutional rights of American citizens. So if a law is introduced, the Supreme Court may review it and decide to appeal it if they decide it does not align with constitutional rights of American citizens, especially if it's considered to be government overreach, as noted on the Supreme Court website. As the final arbiter of the law, the court is charged with ensuring the American people the promise of equal justice under the law, and thereby also functions as guardian and interpreter of the Constitution. So essentially, if something's passed into law by Congress, but it's determined that actually this is going against people's rights, it can be scrapped by the Supreme Court. Now, the next step down from federal law is state law. Each of the 50 states has its own system of laws and courts. And states themselves may have state constitutions that suggest the values of the people within it that their laws must adhere to. However, all state laws must still adhere to the US Constitution above all else. And similarly, the Supreme Court does have the right to review, recall, and override state court decisions based on whether they are deemed as a violation of the American people's rights. So examples of state laws may be criminal matters, divorce and family court, will, inheritance and estates, contracts such as business, property and real estate, and injury compensation such as personal injury claims or work-related injuries. And importantly for this video, state law is the level at which surrogacy laws are determined. So there is no blanket federal law on surrogacy in America, which means each of the individual states can create their own ruling on surrogacy, which means the next section of this video gets a little bit complicated. However, I am going to quickly say something about local law, although it's not greatly important to this video, but since I'm giving a rundown, I'm going to finish. So local laws, first and foremost, can't go against state or federal laws, but at the local level, so at the town, city, county, village level, laws can be passed. And these typically would cover things like renting laws, property zoning, or general local safety laws. And this is how, for example, the place that inspired Footloose, which is Elmore City, Oklahoma, had an ordinance in place from the 1800s that banned public displays of dancing, which was challenged in 1979 when students at Elmore High School wanted to put on a prom. I didn't actually know until researching this video that Footloose was based on a real place. So with all that said, let's have a look at state laws surrounding surrogacy and the components that they're considering surrounding surrogacy when writing these laws. Or in other words, what exactly does surrogacy law say? The Brilliant Beginnings website, which is a surrogacy agency in the UK which actively campaigns for surrogacy reform in the UK, claims that although costly, surrogacy in the USA offers legal security and well-established professional services. It is also ethical, offering protections to surrogates as well as intended parents. So compared to the Kim Cotton quotes we heard earlier in this video, which perhaps suggests that UK surrogacy law is more functional than US surrogacy law, here we're suggesting that perhaps USA surrogacy is a more ethical practice. But is that really the case? Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into it and we will see. So due to how much surrogacy law can differ state to state, it is actually advised that people who are pursuing surrogacy have a surrogacy specialist and surrogacy lawyers involved to talk them through the laws in the states or states they are operating in relation to gestational surrogacy to ensure they are pursuing legal practice. Now, a quick disclaimer considering we are going to talk about laws, and as I just mentioned, this is a very, very complicated topic. I am not providing legal advice. This is not to be taken as gospel about the laws in any specific state, and I do not advise taking any action off anything I have said. I am simply just breaking down what I could gather about the law from my research in order to give a base level knowledge from which we can have this conversation surrounding surrogacy. Please do not take any action based on anything I have said, please and thank you. Now, I found two maps. One is from AmericanSurrogacy.com and one is from CreativeFamilyConnections.com, which showcase the strictness of different states in terms of surrogacy law. I find these visual representations very helpful, although they do differ slightly, so I did want to showcase both. And quite frankly, I would not be surprised if this changed in the near future due to the political landscape of America currently, which is a whole other topic. So the states that have very strict restrictions on pregnancy are, depending which map you look at, Michigan, Nebraska, and Louisiana, or Louisiana with the most strict, followed by Indiana, Nebraska, and Arizona. And in actuality, on the other side of the scale, we have quite a few states, but specifically looking at California, where I would suggest that a lot of celebrity surrogacies probably do take place, it is noted as a state that is surrogacy friendly. Surrogacy.com's page for intended parents suggests that surrogacy friendly states generally grant pre-birth orders regardless of intended parents' marital status, sexual orientation, and in some cases, genetic relationship to the baby. So let's think a little bit more about what components of surrogacy may be considered when creating surrogacy law. So these include how much compensation a surrogate is legally allowed to receive. So in some states, no compensation can be received by a surrogate for the actual act of carrying the baby, whilst other states put a limit on how much a surrogate can receive for pregnancy-related expenses. So the type of surrogacy being pursued is also something considered under surrogacy law. In some states that gestational surrogacy is allowed, traditional surrogacy has been outlawed. Although gestational surrogacy is more popular now, traditional surrogacy does still occur. Whether surrogacy contracts can be legally enforced. This can be a huge hurdle, as whether or not a surrogacy contract or agreement can be enforced could create road bumps later down the line in the surrogacy journey. For example, when it comes to surrogates receiving any compensation that has been agreed to, or when it comes to parental legal rights to that child. And specifically, some states outlaw surrogacy contracts altogether. And the availability of pre-birth orders. So this touches on the legal parentage of surrogate-born children. Some states automatically assume that the person giving birth and their partner are the legal parents of a child. So intended parents would have to take steps to protect their legal parental rights to a baby being born via surrogacy. In some states, this can be done via a pre-birth order. In some states, these orders are only active once the child is actually born, and in some states, you have to apply for parental rights or even go through adoption once the child is born, even if the child is genetically linked to the intended parents. So this is all depending on how parental rights are defined by the state laws in which the surrogate gives birth. So as you can imagine, this can create multiple problems, including whose names go on the birth certificate, who gets to make medical decisions for that child, and most obviously, who has legal custody of the child. So let's compare that to UK surrogacy law. In the UK, there is just one general ruling on surrogacy, and that is as follows. It is illegal to advertise the need for a surrogate or to advertise willingness to be a surrogate as if it were a product or service. You cannot pay a surrogate except for reasonable expenses, although I'm not exactly sure what is defined as reasonable expenses. Surrogacy agreements and contracts are not enforceable. The surrogate is the child's legal parent at birth, even if they are not genetically tied to that child. And then legal parenthood can be transferred via parental order or adoption once the child is born. As you can imagine, this is far less complicated to consider due to it being one general ruling, but looking at both these different approaches, is one more ethical than another? I mean, I think we can all see that in these approaches there is a desire or at least an attempt to safeguard both surrogates and intended parents in different ways. Some of which act to protect potential surrogates from being manipulated or having financial struggles being a motivation for going into surrogacy without being informed of what it entails, which is what compensation caps and surrogacy agreements could be suggested to be doing. In some cases, establishing pre-birth parental orders allows intended parents to have the same legal and medical custody rights to their child as if they were birthing them themselves, as they have the same biological claim. Whilst it's possible to argue that delaying this granting of parental orders and parental rights until after the baby is born protects the surrogate's own medical autonomy. In fact, in 2023 in the UK, the Law Commission recommended a change to UK surrogacy law, which would determine that intended parents are the legal parents of a child born via surrogacy at the point of birth, which ensures custody is awarded to those with the biological link to the child and the intended parents of that child upon birth, but still maintains the medical autonomy of a surrogate. So when we start to think about it like this, it becomes a bit more clear why there are so many different approaches and perspectives being taken by different states on surrogacy, because there are so many parts to surrogacy to consider. And I think we can all agree that it is an incredibly complex topic that involves considering well-being from a multiplicity of perspectives for involved agents. So what exactly does this mean for the recent celebrity culture surrounding surrogacy and public opinion that is formed as a result of it? So what exactly are we talking about when we talk about a celebrity surrogacy craze, and is this actually a craze that exists? Like I said in the intro, we keep seeing this conversation surrounding celebrities and surrogacy pop up on social media and in headlines. So I think it is evident to say that there is at least more interest in this supposed celebrity surrogacy craze than there ever has been before. That's not to say celebrities have only just started using surrogates or that celebrities invented surrogacy, because that's inherently not true. But our interest in the use of surrogates by celebrities seems to be peaked. Now, we will get into public opinion on celebrities' use of surrogacy in the next section, but some may suggest or speculate that despite what they say, whether they say anything at all, celebrities' real motive behind using surrogacy is because, by the nature of having a career in the public eye, where they may constantly have to be on camera or have consistency of appearance or just simply by the nature of being a celebrity and relying on image and how you look as part of your branding. Some suggest this means that celebrities wish to shy away from some of the more real or raw aspects of pregnancy. Thus, they use surrogates. Similarly, people also suggest that they may not wish to put their careers on hold. And this comes into an even more important, wider conversation we're having surrounding celebrities and surrogacy, which is whether they should have to disclose their intentions behind pursuing surrogacy. Now, of course, nobody, not even celebrities in the public eye, owe us an explanation as to why they decide to pursue surrogacy. Obviously, that is an incredibly personal decision, especially if it involves personal medical information. But we can also see that there is a benefit to celebrities being open to discussing the topic of surrogacy. For my part, I will say that most of the research I've ever done on surrogacy is due to seeing celebrities talking openly about it, and a lot of my understanding behind not just the process but the weight of making that choice to pursue that process comes from seeing celebrities and prominent figures discussing their own journeys towards surrogacy. And in turn, I think that increases discussions of different types of parenthood. It increases discussions of the potential medical and emotional complications that come with fertility and pregnancy. And in my case, where I kind of grew up in a very nuclear family, or as close to as you can get, I think it also brings out these topics surrounding different types of families, because of course you may have same-sex couples pursuing surrogacy, or in fact you may just have solo parents pursuing surrogacy as well. So what prominent examples do we have of this celebrity surrogacy craze? Well, I think one of the most high profile cases we have is Kim Kardashian. And in the case of Kim Kardashian, it's fairly well documented that the first two pregnancies that she herself carried took quite a toll on her body. She had preeclampsia with both, I believe, and then also placenta accreta, which is a high risk condition that essentially means the placenta does not dislodge post birth as it should. So, thus, surrogacy made sense for Kim Kardashian due to the high risk of her carrying any more pregnancies herself, and resulted in two more children born in 2018 and 2019. Now, I know their names are out there, but in this video, I will not be including any photos of any of the children mentioned nor saying their names, because one, I don't think it's actually necessary to this video, and I also don't believe it's my place to talk about other people's children by name on the internet. We are talking here about the decision to pursue surrogacy, not actually about the children themselves. Now, speaking of the Kardashian clan, Khloe Kardashian welcomed her second child via surrogacy in 2023, and from what I'm aware of, this was also due to medical complications. As another benefit of seeing celebrities talk about their journeys with surrogacy, Khloe Kardashian has been quite open and vocal about her difficulties surrounding bonding with her child born via surrogacy compared to her first child, who she carried herself. And many have praised that this is a true insight rather than an idealized version of seeing this experience. Especially considering for years on reality TV, we've seen Khloe Kardashian talk about how much she desired to be a mother, and her personal conflicts and difficulties surrounding accepting the decision of pursuing surrogacy rather than carrying another child herself, I think is an important conversation to consider. She has been quoted by people as saying, "The connection took days with her first child. With him, it's taking months, and we still don't have a complete bond." Now, whilst this perhaps suggests a more negative side of surrogacy, Khloe Kardashian has also been quoted in articles and on the reality TV show The Kardashians with actively praising her surrogate. So I think Khloe Kardashian has managed to strike this balance, especially because she is known for being on reality TV, and thus I think people perhaps subconsciously believe they should have this access to information about her life, of being open and honest about her experience of surrogacy without demonizing nor romanticizing it. Others, such as Paris Hilton, have discussed past traumas and medical fears and anxieties as reasons for pursuing surrogacy. Now, famously, Paris Hilton was subjected to parent approved kidnapping and transportation to teenage treatment facilities / schools, which now we would consider to be part of the troubled teen industry, known for their abusive tactics. And she actively campaigns for the closures of these facilities and safeguards to be put in place that protect the well being of young people and teenagers against the destructive techniques and procedures that go unregulated in these types of facilities. Hilton has said that, amongst other traumas, she was subjected to being force fed medication, non consensual medical examinations, and instances of sexual assault. And it is this trauma that Hilton seems to have suggested has informed her decision to pursue surrogacy. And she has welcomed two children, 10 months apart, via surrogate. When talking to Michelle Ruiz for Rombo in 2023, Hilton was quoted as discussing her reasons for pursuing surrogacy. If I'm in a doctor's office, I get a shot, anything, I will literally have a panic attack and I can't breathe. I just knew that would not be healthy for me or the baby, growing inside of someone who has such high anxiety. But Hilton did not talk publicly about her surrogacy journey or even the fact that her and her husband were pursuing this journey at all until each of her children had already been born. In that same interview with Romper, she was quoted as explaining her reasonings behind this approach. My life has been so public, so out there. I didn't want my son coming into this world with any negative energy. With how much public discourse there has been in recent decades surrounding both Paris Hilton and the subject of surrogacy, I think we can all see the type of negativity that Hilton was hoping to protect herself and her children from. And this opens up, I think, an important conversation that I do think we're starting to have more, although I think we still are reluctant to have, which is the fact that there is mental and emotional strain, not just associated with parenthood, but associated with pregnancy itself. And this is also why I personally think there should be safeguards surrounding surrogacy that ensure that someone is both physically and mentally healthy in the same way you would if someone was giving an organ to another person. Because speaking more generally to mental health, if you already have struggled with your mental health, hormone fluctuations or not being able to take certain medications because of pregnancy can really negatively impact you. And that can mean that pregnancy itself, away from any of the life changes that parenthood requires, can have quite a detrimental impact on individuals. And then moving on again, as I mentioned at the top of this video, Lily Collins has received quite a lot of heat recently after posting about her first child who has been welcomed to the world via surrogate. In January 2025, in a joint Instagram post, Lily Collins and her husband Charlie McDowell posted that they had welcomed their first child via surrogate. And the post has indeed caused quite a stir, with some questioning the choice and some outright criticizing it. Now, there's no official line we have received as to why they pursued surrogacy, nor do I think we should speculate as to why they chose this route. What I do think we need to question is why we feel entitled to know why another person pursued surrogacy. As mentioned in the examples before in this video, the choice to pursue surrogacy can be for a real variety of reasons, and those are deeply personal, potentially medical reasonings, and like starting a family in any capacity, those decisions are part of a deeply emotional and uncertain journey. To think, just because someone is famous, that they owe us their reasoning is quite frankly an entitled perspective, and it suggests that celebrities only exist for our consumption rather than existing as people in their own right. I know some people, in response to that perspective, will say, well, they just shouldn't have posted about their daughter then, but they're human. I don't know about you, but whenever a big milestone happens in my life or there's exciting news, I want to shout it from the rooftops and post it on social media. Celebrities are human too. They should be able to celebrate these significant moments in their life and gain positivity back like any of us would expect to. And yes, they posted, which does open them up to criticism, but A, they posted on social media. They didn't do a high profile magazine or podcast interview, which suggests they wanted to carefully tailor how much information was put out there. And B, the fact that as a society, we think we are entitled to knowledge about another person's child or to comment about another person's child, especially a child as innocent as a newborn, is abhorrent to me. The only time you should ever comment about another person's child is either to congratulate them on having that child or to express genuine concerns for their safety. I accept no other reasoning. Charlie McDowell posted a comment in response to the backlash to their choice to pursue surrogacy, stating that it's okay to not know why someone might need a surrogate to have a child. It's okay to not know the motivations of a surrogate, regardless of what you assume. And it's okay to spend less time spewing hateful words into the world, especially in regards to a beautiful baby girl who has brought a lot of love into people's lives. That's all for now because she just pooped and I need to change her diaper. I myself am sending as much love and good vibes their way as possible and really hope they get to soak up as much of that newborn bliss as a family as possible. And the backlash that Collins and McDowell have received led Sophie Bersner for Glamour to write an article surrounding her own experience of pursuing surrogacy. Anyone who wants to be a parent should be able to be a parent, fertile or infertile, gay or straight, celebrity or citizen. Now, of course, these examples are not the only examples of high profile celebrity couples or individuals pursuing surrogacy. In 2024, Olivia Munn and John Mulaney welcomed their second child via surrogate after Olivia Munn underwent treatment for breast cancer post the birth of her first child. Jessie Taylor Ferguson and husband Justin Makita welcomed two sons via surrogate in 2020 and 2022. And then also in 2022, Nick Jonas and Priyanka Chopra Jonas welcomed their first child via surrogate. So, in light of this, what does public opinion say about surrogacy? Now, if you have any kind of interest in the conversation happening surrounding celebrity surrogacy, I'm sure you've seen the types of phrases like wombs for hire, outsourcing childbirth, and born to be sold, which quite frankly is just framing surrogacy as financial transactions and unequal exchanges, which I think we can all agree does feel uncomfortable to consider babies as commodities. I think this also calls back to a line I've heard toted about elective C-sections, which is too posh to push, which is all part of this wider cultural conversation we have, which brands the idea of vaginal births as some kind of badge of honor, or alternatively suggests a type of social stratification between elective medical procedures in terms of pregnancy and birthing compared to vaginal births. Alongside this, prior to the conversation surrounding surrogacy highlighting celebrities specifically, we saw a lot of homo-negative connotations to the conversation surrounding surrogacy. That it was gay couples pursuing surrogacy and men should not be sourcing women to produce children for them. That was essentially concerns for the surrogate that were thinly veiled homophobic comments surrounding the parenting potential of gay couples. And at the very least, many of the articles I've encountered when researching this video carry a very negative tone in relation to surrogacy, especially when pursued by those who are privileged and may have access to resources that many don't, such as celebrities. But despite these criticisms, that has not stopped there being a general rise in popularity of surrogacy in recent years. So, one of the main critiques I see, specifically of celebrities who pursue surrogacy, is that they are pursuing social surrogacy, which is kind of being considered like a subsection of surrogacy, which essentially suggests that celebrities are using surrogates not for medical necessities but for lifestyle choices, such as not wanting to pause a career or not wanting their body shape or type to change. I think we can kind of pick out why many may object to this type of surrogacy. It may be suggested that celebrities are taking away the potential of a surrogate to a couple that are suffering with infertility, for example, just purely because they do not want to carry the child themselves. Or alternatively, some may suggest that this is the start of imposing a dangerous hierarchy amongst women. Essentially, meaning that using a surrogate may begin to be seen as a status symbol where celebrity and wealthy women create social stratification between those who use surrogates and those who birth children themselves. I don't think that's necessarily the case that we're seeing now, but I do think that is a case that some may speculate on. And I do think this criticism relies too heavily on exactly the thing that I'm criticizing about the backlash Lily Collins is receiving, that we think we are owed an explanation as to why individuals are pursuing surrogacy, which would mean potentially exposing very personal medical details that the people involved may still be coming to terms with, they may be dealing with the effects of, or that may carry social stigma themselves. The other major critique I see is surrounding surrogacy as a business and the ethics of surrogacy as a business. So, as we discussed, there are many aspects to surrogacy law and many things to consider when talking about the legal ethicalities of surrogacy. But even if we only focus on the potential financial compensation, there are still many aspects to this critique. Whilst UK law relies on surrogates agreeing to surrogacy on purely altruistic intentions due to the very limited financial compensation involved, globally, there is not necessarily this safeguarding in place. So, this may mean that those in financial strain or in vulnerable groups more generally pursue surrogacy for financial gain as a surrogate rather than absolutely considering all facets of the mental and emotional strain that pregnancy presents. And then on the other side of things, if a surrogacy agreement or contract is not enforceable, this could lead to a situation where intended parents become financially exploited in order to gain access to a child that is most likely biologically their own. Now, obviously, I would suggest in the majority of cases, especially in the US and UK, and especially when celebrities are involved, that this is not the case at all. However, it is a possible critique of surrogacy as a whole, especially when you consider the many aspects of business surrounding surrogacy, from the surrogacy agencies to the necessity of surrogacy lawyers in the US, or even just to the clinics involved with surrogacy, when in the US especially, medicine is first and foremost a business. And then we also have to consider how this may change in the future in terms of laws, especially considering the conservative swing we've seen from American politics in recent years, whether that's with the election of Donald Trump or with the reversing of Roe versus Wade, neither of which I think are great decisions. I mean, just off the top of my head, the questions I would be thinking about is, how may states change surrogacy laws in the future? How may they make it harder for those in minority groups to access surrogacy? Think, for example, about the chatter surrounding the reversing or reconsidering of the legislation that underpins gay marriage, and how that could also impact how same sex couples access surrogacy, and what legislation could get put in place surrounding if a surrogate has medical complications during their pregnancy. And then there is obviously the fact that some people innately have an issue with the fact that others may borrow or hire, as they perceive it, another woman's womb in order to carry a child, which arguably is a very simplified version of what surrogacy is. But it is what Julie Bindel criticized Rebel Wilson for in the 2022 article, Rebel Wilson and the Problem with Surrogacy. I think it's clear to say that surrogacy laws, public opinion, and the roles of celebrities within this conversation is incredibly complex, and it involves considering each individual locational and personal context within which examples take place. And it's a hard balance to strike. I mean, trying to safeguard both surrogates and intended parents, ensuring all parties are operating within the law, and considering whether the law itself is ethical in the first place, whilst giving individuals the privacy they deserve to make their own medical decisions and allowing them to share the joy of welcoming a child into the world. But I do think the conversation surrounding surrogacy could use a little bit less judgment on individuals and a little bit more consideration of the business and process surrounding surrogacy as a whole. After all, surrogacy was not invented by celebrities, nor is it pursued only by them. However, it is a practice that many would consider only celebrities or the majority of celebrities to be the ones pursuing it, due to us only ever discussing it within the context of celebrities. Because we aren't taking the time to have wider conversations on the topic of surrogacy itself. And that is where this video comes in, and why I gave so much kind of detailed background to surrogacy before talking about celebrities and celebrity examples. I'm hoping we can start having this conversation down below in a respectful and nuanced way. After all, nothing is black and white, just like I said in the intro. I don't pretend to be the authority on surrogacy, and you can see all my sources and the research I've done for this video down below in the description. I try and be as transparent in these videos as possible. But of course, I'm over an hour of filming now, but hopefully I can cut this. So in the 40-ish minutes that this video is, I can only mention a certain number of topics. I can't talk about everything. I can't talk about every critique. And I also don't have the time to read every article ever written on the subject of surrogacy because there are absolutely thousands. You could dedicate a whole life of research to it. But hopefully, I've helped give a contextual starting point to this conversation. And I'd also love to hear if anyone in any different cultures or from anywhere different to the UK and the US perspective could throw in their 2 cents of how surrogacy works in their country or their culture. But as always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you below in the comments.